Hey, what's up? It's Kit time for another video. Today we're going to talk about fast jigging. We're going to talk about two types of rods and reels that you could use for fast jigging, and we'll talk about the rods all the way down to the hook. The jigs that we're going to use, or the jigs that we use for fast jigging, and everything in between. Okay, if you're new to the channel, this channel talks about the hows and whys of fishing. We cover everything from big game, ultralight, everything in the middle, including fly fishing. And today we're gonna have a conversation about fast jigging. So what is fast jigging? Fast jigging, first, actually, the history. Okay, just a little bit, just so that you know, the jigging itself wasn't really invented by the Japanese. Jigging itself, with lures that are similar to this, in fact, this is actually a very good example right here, this one. Okay, this is why we actually picked it up. But the very first jigs were actually Scandinavian in origin. So the Scandinavians used this technique, or maybe they invented it, but what we know is that they've been using a technique that can be called jigging for a really long time, and they have these banana looking things called perks, and that's or a banana jig. If you actually search for it, you can actually find like a Scandinavian banana jig or something, but it really looks kind of like the silhouette looks like a banana, but they've been using that in deep water for a long time. Now, what the Japanese did was that when they saw braid, they basically saw an opportunity to deliver small, heavy lures in deeper water to catch big fish. And that's basically how this was actually discovered or kind of developed. So over the years, it has taken the world by storm, and it has become kind of normal. Now, the good thing about fast jigging is that the gear has kind of caught up. So unlike slow jigging, that's still kind of relatively new, fast jigging, or some call it just vertical jigging, Japanese style vertical jigging, there we go. So, or speed jigging, whichever you want to call it, has become so common, and the manufacturing process of the rods has actually spread to China, and they're quite good at it. So I also have an example of that right here, but which means that you can get good decent gear from China. And let me be one to say that there's actually some decent ones. I wouldn't say super good, but decent ones, because as far as jigging is concerned, the rods specifically, they're kind of close to how traditional rods are constructed. Okay, so the jigs, pretty straightforward. They are symmetrical, meaning what you find in one side is also what you find on the other, pretty equal. Although there are some asymmetrical jigs, which I already spoken about in a past video. I'll find all these videos or the playlists and then link them on the bottom so that you can find them. Okay, now a few things that you need to know about fast jigging. Keep in mind, one is that the jigs themselves are actually mostly balanced in such a way that they will fall straight. So on its own, the jigs don't really have action. If you drop them, they drop straight down. That's one. Two, the jigging motion, it is constantly moving. You don't really have long pauses like what you do with slow jigging. So the action of fast jigs is when you are moving your reel. When you stop, the jigs fall straight down. Very different from slow jigging, because with slow jigging, when you stop and you drop, that's when the action of the jig, its inherent action, goes out. But the action of the jig for fast jigging is when you are jigging. Okay? So the action itself of the jig goes out only when you're pulling. So it goes like that, okay? Like that, like that, like that. Zigzags somewhat. And what this is, basically, is the opposite of slow jigging. So slow jigging, when you stop, you drop, the jigs flutter or slide. With fast jigging, it's on the upward direction. So when you're jigging up, it could be that the jigs are zigzagging or going like that. Okay? So there's different techniques. It could be that you're jigging up and then reeling longer strokes like so, or you could be fast, mechanical like that. Um, one reel and then one pitch of the rod, or there's lag like that. So there's different ways of doing it, and it also affects the action of the jig. It could be like that. It could be that it's sliding. It could be that it's like a slalom of sorts. Many different actions for different types of jigs. So it is not singular as a lot of people think. A lot of people think that it's only one way of doing it. No, it's not. There's a lot of ways. Again, the action of the fast jig is when you are reeling up. The action of the slow jig is when it is going down. So kind of the same system, but in opposite directions. Another thing with fast jigging is the use of thicker line. So you can use really thick line, really thick hooks, and high drag pressures, so that when the fish hits, it's a direct contact immediately, and then you start reeling and fighting the fish. Whereas with slow jigging, it's a bit more delicate. Again, with slow jigging, it is a much more finesse application, whereas with fast jigging, this is kind of like hand-to-hand combat with the fish. Almost like trolling, but vertically. That's basically how you could really sum it up. It's moving constantly, okay? And then your lure doesn't stop. Fish bites, boom, and then you fight. So the design of the rod or design of a fast jigging rod is not only to absorb the impact of your jigging, but it also absorbs the force of the fish, and then you fight it. Okay? Now, the two systems that I've been talking about, or I mentioned earlier, is the spinning rod and the conventional rod. These systems are quite robust. So this is a Shimano Game Type J. I'm sure I have another one somewhere, but this is pretty much what I use. Oh yeah, I have an Abu Garcia, which is lighter, and I paired this up with an 8,000 sized reel, and the line that I have on this reel, I think is, if I am not mistaken, is PE 4 or 5. This rod has it's PE 5. So this is a short rod. It is about 5'6", I believe. 5'6" No, 5'8". It says here. Okay, it is rated for up to 300 grams. So in the depth that we're fishing here with PE2, I use PE5 max 300 grams, and my leader is also thicker. So if I use number 40 on my sorry, that's PE4. Okay, so if I use 40-pound test on my PE2, the minimum I put on this is 50. So more than likely this is 80. I don't have a label on it, but more than likely this is 50, 80, and 100 is what I use for my fast jigging normally. But it could go up to even up to about 150 to 200 in certain. So even when you are fishing in shallower water and there's big fish there, you want to pull that big fish off of structure. This is the system that you could use. This particular rod is actually quite light for its size. This is PE 5 to 8. This rod, the capacity, 300 to 500 grams. I paired this up with this reel. You don't have to with this reel. It's just that this is what I have, so this is what I paired with. But it gives me a lightweight rod and reel, and the only thing that I can actually feel a lot of is the weight of the jig. So the weight on this doesn't really contribute a lot as far as sensitivity is concerned. You can get away with a heavier rod and reel, but you won't last as long. So if your rod and reel is lighter, you don't have to fight it. You only have to worry about the size or the weight and the resistance that your jig creates. So lighter rod and reel makes you last longer, but for slow jigging, it directly contributes to sensitivity. Sensitivity for this isn't as important, I believe, because when the fish strike a fast moving jig, they actually strike it hard, so you would feel it. Okay, so when you're jigging like that, lighter rod and reel, easier for you to use. That's something that you should actually think about. Now, that's the rod. Again, you could use the 1 gram per meter rule on this, and it'll work. Now, the reel. The common thing about the conventional reel and the spinning reel is one thing. They're both power gear or low speed reels. You don't want to use a fast reel for this type of jigging because it's like pedaling a bicycle on fast gears going uphill. So think about this. It's gonna be, you can do it, and for some strong individuals, it's easy. Or not easy, but doable. But for most of us humans, a lower speed reel would actually make it easier to reel. So it's softer on the feel. It's easier on the body. That's one. Two, this technique, it's called fast jigging. So, you're actually moving the jig as fast as you can. But see, here's the thing. And this is something that a lot of people don't understand about this type of jigging. The way your jig moves down there, if you're fishing, let's say, 150 meters, in the first few meters that you're fishing from the bottom all the way to about the halfway point, so about 75 meters, the jig isn't moving that fast. So if you're using a fast speed reel, a high speed reel, what happens is that on the bottom, it's not going to move that fast. But what it does is actually leave the strike zone faster. And it's going to be harder on your body. So when you're reeling, the line that you have is less and it's getting more. So when you're turning the handle, one revolution for a full spool will be faster than one revolution with a smaller line stack or arbor. So what a lot of people don't realize is that even if you're moving really fast, here, like that, your jig down there actually moves not so fast. Okay? Now, what happens is that when you're fishing on the bottom and you're jigging on a power gear, it moves the jig slow. So the presentation down there is actually initially slow. Okay? It's slower than you think. As it moves higher and as your line stack actually gets bigger, it moves faster. So when you're fishing the surface, when you're fishing shallow, your jig moves faster than when you're jigging down deep. So think about that. Now, when you hook a fish on high gear at that depth, it's going to be very difficult to winch it up. If you're familiar with winches, cranes, it's a similar concept. You'll see that they have actually a lower speed for heavier loads so that you can literally winch the fish in. And this is what these are good for. This is why Shimano calls theirs PG or power gear. So, reel up, winch, pull the fish out. It's really just a better system than, let's say, a slow when the fishing is active and you're not using this, you're using a slow jig. And slow jigging, you need fast retrieve reels to always keep in contact with the jig and to always sense the jig in any phase, when whether you're lifting the rod or when you're dropping down. But this, you're constantly in contact because you're jigging and tightening the line. So the line stretch doesn't matter. The, what do you call this? The stretch and the slack doesn't matter because you're constantly retrieving. And when the fish bites, even if the rod is actually thick for the same class as a slow jigging rod, it will detect it because the fish will literally slam it and you're constantly moving. That's why it's similar to trolling than it is kind of jigging. Bang, hook up, and then that's it. Now, another thing that a lot of people miss out when they're choosing reels is not just the gears, it's also the length of the handle. So when you buy reels, for specifically for slow jigging, a longer handle would make it actually easier. I don't have it with me, but one of the reels, or the reel that I used to use for fast jigging, isn't accurate. And I had to change the handle to a longer handle to make it a better jigging reel. But in older videos, you actually see me use it. Anyway, so two types of reels also. There's a lever drag and there is a star drag. It's really just up to you. But again, with these Shimano, the Osha jigger, this is a PG actually, and this is the only 2000 I have, 2000 size, because I believe that they made this for fast jigging because of the narrow spool. That's another thing that you should actually look at. On slow jigging reels, you want the reels to be a bit wider, and the reason for that is that, as I explained earlier, your line stack dictates exactly how much line you'd be able to put in. Now, on a narrow spooled reel, the amount of line that you can retrieve is not as consistent as with a wider spool reel. So on a narrow spool reel, the drag spikes up really fast because the line doesn't have anywhere to go except up and down on a narrow spool. Whereas with a wider spooled reel, like take for example an Osha Jigger F Custom 3000. That is a specific slow jigging reel, and you can see that it's wide. Another is what Shimano came up with just recently. It is the lever drag, and you'll see that it's a 2500 size as opposed to a 2000. If you look at 1500 model of the OSHA jigger, it's actually wider for its size. So you can see that the 2000, it's just narrow. So when I made the decision to buy a 2000, it was specifically for fast jigging. For fast jigging, you want a narrow spooled reel because you're you're reeling fast most times. Although there are techniques where you actually pump slow, but most times you're encouraging the bite by reeling in faster and pumping fast. You don't have time to level the line. So a narrow spool is easier because it will actually kind of guide itself. Okay, now if it's not level, what you need to do after the fishing session is drop it down towards the state of the spool where it's flat and it's spooled correctly. Okay, engage, reel in, and level the line. That's the last drop that you will ever make in that particular fishing day. So before you keep your gear and all that, just drop down, fix that bulge, and it's good. So fast jigging, slow jigging, you do that. The line. After the reel, of course, it comes the line. The line really depends on you, but for the depth that I always fish in Fujairah here, normally we have an 8000 or a 6000. This is a max 300 rod, which is basically the same as the normal rods that we have. 250 to about 350 is about max. If you want to use something heavier in certain current conditions, you can go ahead and do that. But as far as the line is concerned, for Fujairah, you could use, depending on what you fish for, this is kind of like my all-arounder. So I fish for AJs, I fish for tuna with this and grouper. And I put PE4. You could put PE5 and it balances well with this rod. And it is also the same for the equivalent that I have for the conventional. Now, over the years, I've actually gravitated back towards the conventional reels more than I do with the spinning. There's nothing wrong with the spinning. It's just that for the spinning rods, I almost exclusively use long jigs on them than with the conventional reels. Now, what I do is for shorter jigs like these and these types, the wider ones and the semi-wide ones, I use a conventional reel. For long ones such as these, and of course our favorite, or one of our favorites, the Sea Falcon Manma Tachiguo, or reel cutlass, I use a spinning reel because a spinning reel has this thing. Okay, it's like a mechanic. You cannot jig this by just reeling. You can pump. You have to pump. Okay, and that pump, on the apex of that pump, is when the jig slides. Okay, so that's when the jig slides, and the spinning reel is really good for that. Whereas with the conventional, you can actually just straight pump. You know, really rapid pumps. You can do that. And although long jigs also work really well for that, the interval that you have for pumping works better for long jigs. That's just me. Okay, that's just me. For you, it might be different. but that's just me. Now for slow jigs though, or for short jigs, sorry, the action is erratic, and what you want is really for this to have like a walk the dog action, just like that, okay? Just like that. So that is achieved way better on a conventional rod and reel than with a spinning rod and reel. So if the action of the conventional is like that, for spinning it's like that. So if you want something that moves really fast, and this is what they're really designed for, like a really erratic action, the conventional rod is a good tool. Okay, now I'll throw this because this is something that I actually mentioned on a one of the older videos. A technique I use is to always keep this, okay, this combo next to me, and it's already rigged. And then when I'm fishing with a slow setup and I get cut for some weird reason, what I do is instead of reeling the line in, I put the rod and reel on a holder. I take my rod, the spinning, okay, because the spinning gives it the slack that you need, and it's the fastest way to get down there really fast. So I throw it down, okay, with a big heavy cutlass, something similar. Drop it down, open the bail, put it on a rod holder. As it's dropping, I take my slow jigging rod and reel it up as fast as I could. As soon as I finish that, put this on the rod holder and take this, close the bail, start jigging. And more than likely, guess what? I'll get a second chance strike. Not from the same fish, but probably from the same school. So it works. So that's something that you need to actually try if you haven't yet. Okay? So that is pretty much the rod, the reel discussed. The jigs we've touched on. And as I mentioned, for shorter jigs, I use conventional rods and reels. Now, there are equivalents, which I have I made a video some years ago about the jigs and comparing them, but there's different versions. Okay, so there's small flat ones, there's ones that are slim as well and short, there's big long ones, and each of the actions that you have on slow jigging can be replicated on fast jigging. In fact, it's the reverse. All the actions that you have on fast jigging is also replicated by slow jigging. Okay, so because this actually came first. Now, fast jigging is actually kind of easier and a bit more straightforward than slow jigging. You use thicker line, you can use heavier jigs, and they're designed for fast, aggressive fish. So longer jigs tend to slide more than the short, stubby ones. Okay, so the short, stubby ones are actually designed to move very erratically, whereas the long ones kind of move slower and slide side to side longer. So the chance of this jig in a horizontal state is longer with these than with these. Okay, so shorter, wider jigs often will have a walk the dog action, a very erratic walk the dog action, and then as you move towards the long length jigs, they will slide more than they would go like that. Okay, these are designed to slide sideways and be on a horizontal position longer than these jigs. There are also, I wasn't able to find, but there are also jigs that are asymmetrical, and are designed to flutter. Now, those you could use in what's called a fake les. The one guy actually popularized that. So all it is just a double pump. Okay, so it's a slower way of working, but what it is just, and then let it flutter. Let it flutter. Fake les they call it, or yeah, pretty much a double pumping method. So a lot of people think that when it comes to fast jigging, you actually like really have to put a lot of effort, but that's kind of wrong. And I have to say that that was one of the ways that you could work jigs in the past, but nowadays the jigs almost work automatically on their own. You just have to learn how to work them properly. Like take for example a cutlass, although it would work on a really fast retrieve, what it is just like pumping and dropping, and just as long as you have the rod tip actually load and unload, and the jig will actually jump on its own and go on a horizontal plane before it actually, so it's like a very wide S motion like that. And that's something that you have to keep in mind. Just because it's called fast jigging or speed jigging, actually we just call it that, but in Japan it's just jigging, so or vertical jigging. So again, you don't have to work it fast. Before, yes, there and until this day, there are some jigs that you work like that because that's how they're designed. But the recent design, more recent and modern jigs, I would say, they have actions on their own, and all you have to do is just literally let the rod tip load, spring back up, similar to what a slow jigging rod does, and that's it. The action actually comes out. That springiness actually helps you stay longer when you're fishing as well, because that absorbs the shock. The leaders for this one, I use 50, 80, 100. Here's a very good example of that. It depends on where we're at and what we're targeting, but you could go thick with these, and even when you're fishing in shallower water. But again, especially if you're fishing shallower water with bigger fish, this would be a better system because you could really pull on the fish and get them out of structure. I remember this one time, shout out to a friend of mine, Kozo. So Kozo, if you don't know, it's Kozo Okubo, very good friend of mine. If he actually comes here to Dubai, he actually stays with me. But anyway, one fishing adventure we had, he caught this really big amberjack, and he was testing something, so I kind of gave him the floor. So he was testing something out. He was testing a new pike hook from Decoy, a very big one, and then a few jigs from Sea Falcon. This one actually, he was testing this, and he caught a really really big amberjack. Really shallow water. It was with a 2000 sized OSHA jigger, and he was using really thick braid, I think PE8, and then 100-pound or 150-pound leader, and he got that fish in, and that was in 30 meters of water. But there's some really big fish there, so a system like this, like lock drag, pulled the fish out, and that's ideal. Now a lot of people, especially in Australia, they have big fish in shallow water, and no, I mean, it's not a good idea to actually use slow jigging equipment for like big fish, because it's a finesse fishing technique. You don't use 4-pound test for amberjack. There's a select group of people that do that, but majority of the people that just want to catch fish should be using the right gear to target them. And I believe slow jigging gear, although it can be effective, is not the right type of gear for that sort of fishing. Shallow water, big fish, this would be a better option. Now, you would be saying like, oh, but what about the movement of the jig? They're not, they are not good for shallow water. Like, I agree with you. And that's what you change. You don't change the rod and reel and stick with the same jig. You actually change the jig and use the right rod and reel. You know what I mean? It's simple. There are asymmetrical jigs that can flutter and are designed to flutter. And that's what you use. So let's say a Y2 jig from Hot can do that. Okay. One of my favorites, one of my favorite lures, the drift tune from Hot, is actually asymmetrical. I'll see if I can find one for you guys to see here. But the drift tune is an asymmetrical jig. Here we go. And it is a wide jig. See? So it's wide. And it is asymmetrical. So you have a flat back, curved here. So literally, this is designed to flutter. And so literally, this jig is designed to flutter, and it is designed for fishing like that. This is why in some videos I say that you can slow jig with this, because literally it's the fast jigs slow jigging jig. And honestly, there's quite a few other jigs that are of this type that you can use. Not necessarily slow jigs, but are asymmetrical. And again, I have a video that's discussing this. There's quite a few. Even Major Craft has some. And they're not slow jigs just because they're asymmetrical. They're actually fast jigs that you can slow jig with because of the design. I once had dinner with Minami, CEO of Hots. Good friend of mine, but we were talking about this, and I was telling him like, hey, I do this with the drift tune, and he says, wow, you actually discovered that without even asking. That's quite admirable. But yeah, the design of the jig, and a lot of people, and he added that a lot of people don't realize that, but that was our intention. It's actually so that you can fish it on the flutter. Okay, so again, don't change the rod and reel, change the jig. It's cheaper too. So, it's pretty straightforward. Now, the hooks. So before the hooks, you have your split ring and you have your solid ring. Okay, now with the solid ring, here's something that's different when it comes to fast jigging. The solid ring that you put in can be non-load bearing. So if I put it here like that, my line towards the leader actually goes on that solid ring. So the purpose of the split ring is just to attach your jig onto. And when you're fighting the fish, you're fighting it with the hook straight out like that with the assist hook. And it's a direct line of contact between you and the fish. And the jig has nothing to do with it. The jig, as a benefit, cannot be used as a point of leverage. Okay, so the jig swings like that, and it can't be used as a point of leverage by the fish. It can't pry this off. Obviously, you still lose fish, for one reason or another. But the job of the split ring for this is only to hold the jig, and that's it. That is it. Your line gets attached to a very sturdy solid ring. You have your assist cord, which is thick. Okay, this is one of my favorites right here, the Varivas SS. Really, really good. You have that attached to a hook that's very, very thick right there, because again, you are fighting the fish and really pulling it, and sometimes not even allowing it to run. So here's a very good comparison. This is a VMC fast jigging hook compared to a hook for slow jigging. And as you can see, they're similar size, but as you can see, the slow jigging hook, and this is, believe it or not, this is already the medium size. It's not even like the specific for this is medium, and that's still thin. Then medium wire for fast jigging. Okay, now if we compare that with a hook that is specifically, and it's thin, again, from VMC, apples to apples, you can see how thin the hook is. And believe it or not, this is actually a smaller hook size than this one right here. So you can see the difference by use, and a lot of people actually kind of mix these all together, but it's actually pretty straightforward. Fast jigging, designed as a winch, a mini winch in your hand to pull the fish out of structure. Slow jigging, more finesse for when the bites are hard, for when the bites are few and far in between. When they're active, this is what you use, and you can yank them out, their dentures, their mom and dad's dentures, and even the grandma's dentures off of the structure they live in. Very, very important. If you want a slow jigging type presentation, slower lifts, okay, slower lifts, but still, doing that, slower lifts, fluttering, change the jig. Don't change the rod and reel. Okay, so that is it. I guess that's about covers pretty much most of this. This is a very, very simplified version of things, and for a more in-depth look at this, I'll put a a playlist together, or the links to the playlists together in the description. Okay, as for the construction of these hooks, I regularly have videos on making jigs, assist hooks for jigs, so you can again watch them at your leisure as well. But that is it for this video. Okay, congratulations for the guys that actually reached the end. Now, would you be able to fast jig with slow jigging equipment? Not really. Would you be able to slow jig with fast jig equipment? No. I mean, two different systems within one technique. Okay? One is going up, one is going down. Now, if you're familiar with cars, you would know that an F1 car is like the fastest car that you could put on pavement. Very useless in the desert. Okay? You have a car, a pickup, big wheels lifted up, really good on mud. Worthless. Totally worthless on an F1 circuit. It's the same thing. You can use one very effectively for its designed purpose. You could use the other for the same thing. Okay? What it's designed for. For those guys who think that they can do better with just one type of gear, that's great. If you live in Australia, you live in the States where there's a lot of fish, you could do whatever you want. In fact, I could use a hand line and actually probably do as good as you can in those places. But if you live in places where the fishing is really hard, I mean, come on, guys, like anywhere where conservation is practiced, fishing is easy. These types of systems, they're designed in Japan, where the fishing is difficult. They designed it to be very specific and very specialized for their fishery, and they got adopted to different parts of the world. So that's that. The techniques are kind of surgical in precision, and in practice, they can be very deadly when applied correctly in other places. So the system, again, it's a PE system. It's not pound test or whatnot, but this is more flexible than slow jigging gear, I have to say. And yeah, it just works. So if you haven't yet, give it a try, because it'll change the way you see things. Really, jigging, like for me, I adopted this quite early, around 2006, 2005. I was when I came here, I was already jigging and I was catching them. I was already jigging back in the Philippines before I moved to Dubai. So when I first came here, I was already shore jigging, and people here didn't even know what it was. They were laughing at me for casting out something. They were laughing at my line because I was using braid and they were using mono. But it's something they didn't understand. But again, this is what I'm saying. If you don't understand these things, you would think that they're useless or it's not useful. But hopefully with this simplification, a lot more people would understand. And that's what I'm here for. Okay? So if you haven't yet and you want to learn more, click on the subscribe button. If you think this is something that your buddies would appreciate, go ahead and share this video. And if you want to support what I do in this channel, click on the join. Simple as that. That is it for now. Thank you very much for sitting and hanging out with me. They agree. I don't know if you guys could hear after the mic upgrade, background noise is actually at a minimum. But anyway, Strider and King agrees. That's it for now. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Class is dismissed.